Assalamu alaikum, this is Fadwa Wazwaz. I am hoping, last time I discussed with you power, protection, and oppression, and the theme behind one of the themes, basically, in my book, Reflections of Faith, Lessons from the Prophets. And I use that theme throughout my book, trying to walk through or reflect on the life of Prophet Moses, upon him peace. I did a series of blogs on his life story. There's still a few more chapters that I am working on, but I'll leave those in the book. I just wanted to give a glimpse of what was going to be in the book, just to help people reflect on my writings a bit. Another theme that I have been working on is love and projection. And I want to give a little background of where that theme came from. One of the things that I was trying to figure out when trying to work on Prophet Joseph and Jacob's life was how to best figure out a theme that best matches their journey and their life story. And I noticed, like, there is, and even like in God's names, there is this theme of opposites. Al-awwal wal-akhir, the first and the last, al-nafi' wal-dar, the one who benefits and the one who allows harm to touch you. There are many themes like that in the Quran. It talks about, the night and the day. It's the whole theme of opposites throughout the Quran. So I thought I would need, and for his life story, given the journey that he went through, I need a sort of an opposite type theme. Power and oppression is in a way opposite, but it also has a little more in depth about a particular relationship that I was focusing on, which is between people in power and people who are oppressed. But this one had to do with more the spiritual relationship, less to do with the relationship between people, but more to do with just the spiritual reality of love. And so what would be the opposite of love, I wondered. Many think it's hatred, and I just did not really click with the idea that the opposite of love is hatred. Indifference, some said, and there were so many different types of words that people thought of. I always felt that the story was not really focusing on one particular type, like, a person who's filled with hatred or a person who's filled with diseases in their heart. But it was, again, that whole spiritual reality. And I kept, just thinking about it over time, just writing down my thoughts. And I ran across this article saying, love and projection. And I read the article, and it seemed to pretty much explain from a psychological reality, given the works by Carl Jung also. And I felt this really does match what I'm trying to look at. And I read a little further in detail, just reread my notes, reread my reflections on the life of Prophet Joseph and Jacob, and I found it matched very, very perfectly to what I was trying to point out in as a reflection point. And I felt that his story, in fact, hit that point home. And the article, it's called, Is It Love or Is It Projection? ShadowDance. I mentioned that in my reflections on Engagement Minnesota. But just to give you a quote from that particular article that I read, it says, the value of taking back our projections is that we can now see and accept our partners for who they are. Now, she's speaking about a relationship here, love and projection, but I'm speaking more about that whole spiritual reality. And I'll just go a little more in detail as I finish the quote. That we accept them, but not for we want them to be. I mean, like, we're not trying to change somebody or fix them. Not what we wish they would change into, not for what they can give us, but for who they are. The love that can now grow between two partners is profound because it's real. Real love, unlike projection, is a willingness to see and support another person to be their own unique, separate self. This will untangle us from seeking in them the perfect parent mirror image of ourselves, for as long as we are still seeking to be completed by another person, we will not allow them their own autonomy. And I thought about that a little in depth and in detail. And I thought, taking back our projections, and I read the story of Prophet Joseph and his father again. And I realized that's really the best theme for his life story. Because if you walk through his life story, and I'm trying to work a little bit also on a way to tell his story. It's everyone's like having their narrative and their storytelling. As I said in the previous video, that people reveal themselves by themselves. So everybody reveals themselves in the story. So it's a story we tell others, a story that lures the innocent, like his brothers worked with, and they're of a faith community. They worked with their father to lure him into away from their father so that they can go ahead and dump him in the well. A story that hides our crimes. Then they came back to their father and they had another story. And it was a way to cover up what they had just done by claiming the wolf ate him. A story of prophet that enslaves another. So there were the people who saw him in the well, made a deal with his brothers because, the person always goes to the scene of the crime. So they went back to see who would grab him from the well. They went, made a deal with the person for the smallest price. There's a story of self-interest. The king bought him from these individuals for a very small price. A story that throws our sins onto the innocent. There was the woman who tried to lure him in the kingdom. A story that hypes the crowd. Then she goes ahead and hypes up the entire women in the kingdom against Joseph. A story that seeks protection from evil and falling into ignorance, and we see the reality of Joseph, where in that clash he withdraws and tries to seek protection, because now as he sees himself as one against a crowd of women in the kingdom who all their husbands are supposed to be people of power in the kingdom, and so he just immediately withdraws because he realizes he's not going to be able to be pitted against that type of evil. These are all stories of projection. Everybody's really projecting their reality onto Joseph, or whatever lurks inside them is preventing the love which Joseph and Jacob represent from being received by them. So as I thought about it a little more in depth, I thought this is really the best theme for the story of Joseph and Jacob, because it wasn't hatred. You saw envy from his brothers. You saw greed from the people who bought him. You saw self-interest from the people who took him from the well. They found him in the well. You saw self-interest from the king who wanted him just for maslahah, self-interest. Or maybe he'll be of benefit to us. You saw lust or desire from his wife, the king's wife. From the women, you also who all hyped each other. You saw psychopathy, but then also a form of, if you will, not just desire, but also a form of deception, that they were so ingrained in their own self-deception that they were not able to see another human being. What they really, even though they said, is this an angel? They still didn't recognize that is a human being who has his own autonomy. And so they all hyped themselves up against him. But as you could see, it wasn't just one particular issue that made them blind to see the reality of Joseph. It was many, many types of illnesses and diseases that they were not able to see Joseph for who he was, or even Jacob for who he was, until they took back their projections. And that really fit best the story of Joseph and Jacob, because then the story continues, and normally we don't see that in life, but in this particular story, the brothers sought forgiveness, and they were able to see Joseph for himself. They by themselves recognized him. The king's wife and the woman, they were able to see them. They took back their projections. They acknowledged their sins. They were able to see him for who he was. The king himself was able to now call him the truthful person. He was able to take back his projection, and they were able to see him for who he was. So then I thought that the opposite of love is not really hatred. It's not hatred or indifference, or what we normally say, in society, that we ascribe it to one particular disease. But it's really all the spiritual diseases that we accumulate within us that repel the light of God from reaching our heart. And that's exactly what Joseph represented in that story. He represented the light of God. He represented the source and connection for all of these individuals to embrace and to connect to God. And so I felt that that was the best theme to best connect to the prophet Joseph and Jacob. The other reason behind, someone had mentioned to me, why do you not mention things like happiness or in the story? And there's a reason for that, that I don't really go into that particular line of thinking. Let me just, thought I had it right here, but I'm trying to find it. But there was a study done, as I'm trying to find my notes. There was a study done. And it was by a team of psychologists who were studying happiness, and the whole understanding of happiness. And I started to look at their study a little bit in detail. And there were a bunch of researchers. Some of them, it was the Journal of Positive Psychology. There were some psychological scientists. They asked about 400 Americans aged 18 to 78 whether they thought their lives were meaningful and or happy. So examining their self-reported attitudes toward meaning, happiness, and many other variables like stress levels, spending patterns, and having children over a month-long period. So this is based on a few studies that I read, but this is one of them. The researchers found that a meaningful life and a happy life overlap in certain ways, but are ultimately very different. Leading a happy life, the psychologists found, is associated with being a taker, while leading a meaningful life corresponds with being a giver. So happiness without meaning characterizes a relatively shallow, self-absorbed, or selfish life in which things go well, needs and desires are easily satisfied, and difficult or taxing entanglements are avoided. The authors write, people who have high meaning in their lives are more likely to help others in need. If anything, pure happiness is linked to not helping others in need. And the researchers, which include Stanford University's Jennifer Aker and Emily Garbinsky, write, what sets human beings apart from animals is not the pursuit of happiness, which occurs across all the natural world, but the pursuit of meaning, which is unique only to humans. According to Roy, one of the authors also, he's the lead researcher. I apologize, I'm probably not saying his name correctly, Baumeister. He's the lead researcher of the study and author with John Terney, Tierney, of the recent book Willpower, Rediscovering the Greatest Human Strength. But that particular study, another study by reading, there was even an article on it in the Atlantic. There's more to life than being happy. There's more to life than being happy. But some of the research that has been done on happiness is that people who are always obsessed with seeking happiness and seeking joy, seeking happiness and seeking joy, tend to be narcissistic, self-absorbed individuals who are takers. They're more interested in animalistic type. They have more animalistic type desires. They're not spiritual beings. And they're more likely to harm others to get what they want. Because what makes them happy is what drives them. Whereas people who seek meaning in life, and that's really reserved just for human beings, just for human beings. If they go down that road and they internalize that meaning, then there are usually people who tend to be more forbearing, will tolerate suffering, and will prefer others over themselves because they have a certain wisdom and meaning behind the actions that they take. What drives them is not what makes me happy, what brings me desire, what brings me joy. They have a much more wider lens in understanding society and life and reality. So when something bad or negative happens to them, they're more likely to reach out and engage that individual, try to resolve issues. Whereas someone who's a taker could care less. They just take. They don't really care. They just will keep running after whatever they can get their hands on, and just if it makes them happy, they'll just take it. Whatever, even if it doesn't belong to them, they'll just take it, and that's their worldview of being happy. Whatever makes you happy. It could be lust. It could be moving Joseph out of his father's love. So they'll push him away, more likely to harm. That's what made them happy. It could be she had a desire for Joseph. It could be I could make a profit by Joseph. That makes me happy. I'll make a profit. If I go ahead and, just sell Joseph, I make a profit. It could be self-interest. I can't have a son. I'll buy the slave, and maybe he'll be a benefit to us. That makes me happy. So people who tend to be driven by what makes them happy, usually they're takers, self-absorbed people who will enable and nurture society to be a taker society, to be a self-absorbed society, more animalistic in nature instead of more spiritual in nature. So that's another reason why I don't focus too much on joy and happiness, because if we follow the story of Joseph and Jacob, what drove them was not a pursuit of happiness. What drove them was a meaning. They had a higher meaning and connection to God. And he kept saying, Jacob would say, I know from God what you know not. Meaning. And so that's what drove Joseph and Jacob. When Joseph was in the prison, how did he respond? He told them about the higher realities of of the spiritual world. That this is, from God. And he was able to accept it. So he did not hurt anybody. And even when he came out, he didn't hurt anybody. And so we see that here is Joseph and Jacob driven by meaning. And here's all the people who are fighting Joseph and Jacob driven by what makes them happy. So my writings tend to say, not that we should be sad, but as Khalil Gibran said, some say joy is the greatest. And some say sadness is the greatest. And I say to you, they're inseparable. But what drives us should be meaning. It shouldn't be joy or sadness. It should be meaning, and we should be able to look for the wisdom in things so that we could better make choices, because at times the choice before us is what makes us happy. Will be harmful not just to ourselves but to others. So we should, by choice, choose to be sad than to be happy and harm ourselves and others. And if we are given the ability to, yes, be happy and choose happiness, but it's not harmful to us or to others, then there's nothing wrong with being happy. But what should drive us should be meaning. It should never ever be happiness, because oftentimes these are narcissistic takers who are self-absorbed individuals who, if you look into their lives, you find that they're abusers, where they've harmed others. And that's really, again, within the story of Joseph and Jacob. You see that whatever made them happy, they may have been different things, but they all, in their own different various ways, harmed Joseph. One was driven by happiness, what made them happy, and the other was driven by meaning. So we should really be more interested in meaning over happiness. Assalamu alaikum.